So we're starting a great series today, and the truth is almost none of you need this. We're going to talk about marriage, okay? And so the truth is we all have this all figured out, and so what I want you to do is listen for all the other people who aren't here so you can tell them what they missed, okay? And that's really how we tend to think about this stuff. We think, well, I have it figured out. I have the, and so let's kind of put all that aside for a minute. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to talk about this. And I really believe that God will enrich our lives as we kind of take steps and as we're faithful. And so I mentioned the story of Abraham. So Abraham and Sarah were this couple from the Mesopotamia area so many thousands of years ago. And I mentioned that God speaks to this guy, Abraham, and he says, listen, I'm going to make you into a great nation. You're going to be actually the father of many nations, and your wife, she's going to be like a princess or a queen. Like many peoples in the world are going to come from her. And so this is the promise, but the promise, he says, there's going to be these unique challenges and these triumphs along the way, and that is what Abraham experienced, but it was going to require faith on his part to leave behind everything and everyone that he knew, okay? And so that's what Abraham did, left his homeland, left the people that he knew, and ventured out into the unknown. And right off the bat, they get to this area that's their promised land, and there's a famine, right? And so they get there, crops are failing, people are starving, it's rough, and so they go, okay, you know what? Maybe we showed up on a bad day, okay? It's kind of like, hey, let's go to church today. Oh, there's a foot of snow. And so anyway, so they showed up on a bad day, so they thought, we'll come back. And so Abraham decides, listen, I cannot provide for my family here in the unknown, in this famine. So we're going to go to Egypt where they have plenty, and we'll live there. We'll wait out the famine, and then we'll come back. And so that's what Abraham does. He packs up his wife and their servants and all this kind of stuff, and they travel to Egypt. But along the way, they go, hey, this is a powerful country with a powerful king. And Abraham recognizes something. He says, like, Sarah, you are exceedingly beautiful, right? You're so hot that what's going to happen is these people are going to see you, and they're going to kill me to get you. So here's what I want you to do. During this short time that we're here in Egypt, I want you to tell everybody that you're my sister, not my wife. And then everyone will be really nice to me because they'll think that I can give them a good hookup with you. And so this is such a great plan. And so she's like unsure about it, So she says, well, we'll see. They get there. She does what Abraham says. They tell everyone that they're brother and sister. And then someone sees how beautiful she is, and they go to the king himself, and they say, listen, there is this amazing woman that just moved into the country. You need to make her your wife. We need her as queen. Now, they come over, they say, hey, Abraham, where's that sister of yours, And here's the thing. He's already told the story. Now he's on the spot, and he can't say, hey, I was just kidding. She's actually my wife. And so they take Sarah, and she marries the king. And Abraham doesn't say a word. And I'm sure he was afraid, and I'm sure that there were all these extenuating circumstances, but he lets her just be taken. And there's a period of time where she is the wife of the king of Egypt. Now here's this unknown or unpredicted side effect where people are now exceedingly nice to him because he's related to the king. So everyone's giving him fields and giving him crops and giving him animals, and he's getting super rich. And so he's got this struggle inside. I have this beautiful wife that I should go and tell everybody the truth and take her back. But I'm also kind of getting rich through this process, and maybe I can get more wives with all this stuff I'm getting. And so that's his struggle. Eventually, he doesn't do the right thing, and so God just intervenes. And God makes it known to the king that he's taken another man's wife somehow. The king gives Sarah back, and then they leave Egypt with all of the possessions, and Abraham has his wife again. But I want you to stop, because the Bible doesn't spend a lot of time talking about this, but stop and think about how difficult this would have been for Sarah when she's given back to Abraham. Like, where were you, man? Like, come on. Big, tough guy, supposed to be my defender. Like God's going to bless us and give us many nations through us. And at the first sign of trouble, you let me be taken away by somebody else. And now I'm supposed to just settle back in and just be your wife. I'm sure there was an argument or two. I'm sure there was a lot of lonely nights. I'm sure there was a lot of cold shoulders and hurt feelings and all kinds of stuff. But eventually they move on. And now they're as time goes by, they're getting wealthier and wealthier, and this kind of jump start that they had from all of Egypt's wealth really helped them out. And they're basically becoming like their own city. So they, at one point, Abraham counts, and he has 318 men working for him as servants. 318 men. So if you think about that's just the men. If you think about all of their wives and their kids and everything else, he basically had become a city by this point already. There's thousands of people in Abraham and Sarah's orbit, and they're really becoming somebody, and it seems like the dream is really coming true. And then there's another roadblock where they have this nephew who's kind of like, you guys have like that nephew or that crazy uncle? And so they have a nephew who's a little bit of a problem. And so this nephew gets captured by these kings. He lives in this other city. And these 4 kings go to war against the city that the nephew lives in. And they take him prisoner and they carry him off as a POW. And so now Abraham's nephew is a prisoner of war, being held captive by an army of 4 different kings. So Abraham gets his 318 men, and he gives them all swords, and he goes, all right, we're an army now. And so he gets his 318 men, and he goes to war against 4 different kingdoms. And so now imagine being Sarah in this moment. Right? All these promises, all this stuff that God has given us thus far, and Abraham is going to risk it all for this idiot nephew. Like, what are you doing, Abraham? You're going to get killed. You've got 300 men against all of these kingdoms. And imagine that period of time as she waits. They didn't have cell phones back then. They didn't have any of that stuff. So I imagine weeks or months go by, and then eventually they come home, and God gave them victory, and he brings back not only the nephew, but they bring back all these spoils of war, and Abraham defeats 4 kings, which, now furthers this process of him becoming their own nation. Like they've just defeated 4 other nations, and he's just a dude with a bunch of servants. And so now they're getting wealthier and more powerful and more known by people. And it's mounting up quickly now. But here's the struggle. They're 10 years in at this point since they left their homeland. God promised them they're going to be a father of many nations, he and Sarah. And 10 years in, and they still have not had any children. Sarah's still barren. And so Abraham's beginning to really get frustrated with God. And he's saying, God, like, what's the deal? It doesn't matter how much you give me, how many people I have working for me, how much land and how much inheritance I have. I'm going to die, and a stranger is going to inherit all of this stuff. You've given me no heir. The promise was that I'd be the father of many nations, and there's been no offspring at all. So everything that it's accomplished feels like a waste to Abraham, right? And so imagine being Sarah in this point. It was worse than it even is now. Like back then, women really kind of felt like they had one job, and it was producing children. And so for Sarah, she sees the frustration of her husband. She sees that all of this stuff has been accomplished, but they still haven't had children, and she feels like it's her fault. So she feels an increasing pressure, and nothing makes it better. 10 years go by, nothing's making it better. How many of you guys, some of you experience this, if you talk about it, it's a problem. If you don't talk about it, it's still a problem. And the more time that goes by, the more this issue of no offspring, no children, begins to dominate their life together. It's the elephant in the room all the time. And in Abraham's mind, all the good stuff that God has given him is almost nullified by the fact that there's no kid to leave it to. And so eventually, Sarah cannot take the pressure and the heartbreak and the feeling like she's failing as a wife. And so she comes up with a really stupid idea. Now, I know they say there's no such thing as a bad idea. This one was a bad idea. And so she's got this servant girl named Hagar that she picked up while they were in Egypt. She says, listen, why don't you go hang out with Hagar? I'll let you hang out with her for a little bit. And then she can produce a child, and it'll be like me giving you a child because it's my servant giving you a child. And Abraham is like just the classic idiot who says, I don't see any problem with this. This could not go wrong in any way, okay? And so he's like, if you're sure, babe. I mean, he's like already walking in, like, I don't want to do this if it makes you uncomfortable. And he goes for it. So some time goes by, and Hagar is pregnant, and now the real problems start. Because what Sarah thought would make her feel better has actually made her feel worse. Now there's this other woman who's able to give her husband what she hasn't been able to give him after all these years. And so her heart just turns, and she starts being mean to Hagar. And now Hagar's getting abused, and for a situation she didn't have any control over. She didn't want to do this. But now she's being taken advantage of, beaten up on, all this kind of stuff. And so there's this deadlock between these two women. And then you have Abraham stuck in the middle of all of it. And so as the days go by, the child is born. It gets more and more bitter between Hagar and Sarah. They're just at each other's throats all the time. Abraham is torn because he's got this kid now that he really wanted, but he's got this woman that, he is just stuck between a rock and a hard place, and things are just crazy. And it's a situation that's just filled with heartache, with hurt, with pain, with incredible amounts of jealousy, with animosity, with regret, with love mixed in there, with confusion, and for Hagar, just complete powerlessness over the situation, right? Talk about living the dream, okay? This condition went on in their marriage for 14 years. They lived in that state. And so I can imagine, I just want you to think like maybe you're a neighbor for Abraham and Sarah. Maybe you're a friend. Maybe Sarah's your sister. Maybe you're buddies with Abraham. You're hanging out with them during this 14-year period, and they're talking about their marriage. How many of you guys have had talks with people about marriage that could go like this? Probably went. And they're just telling you all the problems. And what do you say? You say, I get it, man. Marriage is hard. Isn't that what we say? People throw it all out there. I get it, dude. Marriage is hard. Right? And that's kind of where we're going to start for this next couple of weeks. Just this idea. Is marriage hard? And so I want to say this, and then we'll kind of unpack it and explain it. But marriage isn't necessarily hard. Life is hard. Okay, so I want to do this scientifically with some polling. If you're married, raise your hand. Go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. Now, if you're married, keep your hand up. If you've ever had trouble in life in any form, go ahead and take your hand down. All right, some of you guys are like, babe, should I take it down? No. Right, you've had trouble. It's pretty much unanimous across the room. Just one person that was really afraid of their wife, like, no, I've never had trouble, right? And now let's try something else. If you're single, right, raise your hand. If you're not married currently, raise your hand. Good, okay, there's a lot of us. If you've ever had trouble of any kind, take your hand down. Whoa, Dominic's never had trouble. All right, some of us are pleasantly clueless. And so anyway, here's the thing. If single people have trouble and they're not married, then the root cause of trouble must be more fundamental than marriage, right? Trouble must come even without marriage. Jesus said this, in this world you will have trouble, but rejoice because I've overcome the world. So according to Jesus, your spouse is not necessarily the source of your trouble. Life in a fallen world is. Now I said necessarily. They may still be, but it's not necessarily the case, all right? So according to Jesus, they're not necessarily the source of your trouble. Life in a fallen world is. Because of sin, nothing is what it should be, all right? People as a whole are not what we should be. We intend things that we don't do. We try things that we're not capable of. We should be in places that we're not, and yada, 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 right? We're not what we should be, okay? Even societies are not what we should be. I mean, we have all these societies, all these grand efforts and intentions, and it just never goes the way that it should. Governments are not what they should be, right? And your body is not what it should be. I was backstage. I went sledding the last couple of days, and I'm like barely able to stand up here right now. Karen's like, should I get you a chair? I'm like, no, I'm going to look tough. I posted about sledding. I can't show that I've been defeated by the snow. And so anyway, right, listen, like your body is not what it should be. All right, and so you know it doesn't do what it always should do or what it used to be able to do. It doesn't always look like it should look. Fill in the blanks. Well, as you've seen this week, the weather is not always what it should be or it could be. I mean, there's just life in this world is unpredictable. It's broken. It's fallen. Everything and everyone is subject to the corruption of sin. Right, and so it's not just sinning itself, it's the long-term impact of that sin, the brokenness that it produces. So I want you to hear this if you miss everything else. It is a trick from our enemy to get us to view troubles that come from life in this world as if they come from life with our spouse. That is a trick of Satan, to get you to attribute troubles of life in this world and make it become troubles of life with my spouse. That trick sets us up for constant, misplaced frustration. Some of us are walking around frustrated with our spouses all the time, and it's just simply because our life isn't what we hoped it would be. And somewhere on a subconscious level, we've believed the lie that that person is supposed to make our life what it's supposed to be. So if our life isn't what it's supposed to be, they must be letting me down. They must be dropping the ball. And so anytime life isn't what we want, if we believe that lie, our frustration for where life is attributed to our spouse. And it's without even thinking about it. It just happens subconsciously, and it causes us to have impossible expectations of our spouse. You know, when we're unhappy, we think that they should be able to make us happy. When we don't feel good about ourselves, we think that they should be able to make us feel good about ourselves, right? And just fill it on and on. There's all these impossible expectations. We want a life that looks like this, but when it looks like this, there's frustration and unmet expectation because we've believed the trick of our enemy. So I want to look back at our story couple, Abraham and Sarah. Listen, to this trip into Egypt, it's easy to paint Abraham as the villain. But the truth is, he was walking into an impossible situation. He had the faith to follow God into an unknown land with all of these people he was responsible to provide for. Right? The world wasn't then like it is now. You can't just go and get a job. There's no government assistance for people and while they fill in the gaps. Like, it all rested on him. He had these people who would starve to death if it weren't for him. And so he felt this weight of responsibility. And then he's walking into this place where not only in Egypt is he supposed to provide, but he's supposed to protect in this land that's a very strong land with established power sources and all of that. And so he feels all this pressure. Life is exceedingly difficult. And did he make a dumb decision on how to handle it? Yes, right? But even without his dumb decision, that situation still would have had trouble. You think about Sarah. She's not the villain when it comes to the whole Hagar idea. She is a broken-hearted woman who's just grasping for solutions. And the solution that she grasped for, yes, it brought more pain than it brought help. But the truth is, they would have had trouble even without her bad idea. And that's just the reality, is that no matter, we can make it better or we can make it worse, but the truth is we're going to face trouble in this world, and we have to be prepared for that. Guys, marriage isn't hard. Life is hard. If you take nothing else away from today, take that. Life is hard. It's not that marriage is hard. And if you will face the troubles of life together, remembering that you're on the same team together against the trouble, then marriage will become this good thing, this enriching gift in your life. But you have to recognize where the battle line really is. And so often we draw the battle line between us and our spouse. And we think if I can just get them on the right page, everything will be great. But that's not the issue. You've drawn the line too close. You need to move it over here. You go, no, this is just a tough situation. And they might be dumb, but it would be tough without them being dumb, right? And I might be dumb too. We're all just dummies in this together. We're facing the trouble together, right? And all of us, not only are we different, but we're all fallen and broken. And so we have to recognize that this is a person who's imperfect, who in most cases is doing their best, but they're just a man, okay? And so the standards can't be that high, all right? But anyway, next thought is this. Navigating life's troubles together is made more complex by the differences between men and women. All right, you probably haven't picked up on this, but we're different, okay? And those differences go further than how we look, okay? We are different. So a couple of years ago, Karen and I, we lived in the city, and we had one of those like 100-year-old city houses that has the amazing, intricate wood trim. You ever seen those places? I mean, like you buy a house in the county and it's like they just put a window in, they don't even care. In the city, they put a window in and the trim comes out like 10 feet from the window. I mean, you can put stuff there, it comes out, you gotta like walk around you gotta reach in to open the window over the windowsill. It's ornate, it's decorative. And we had this one in the kitchen, this window with this huge windowsill, and it actually had like these cupboards built in the bottom, and it was really very cool looking, right? But we also had a very small refrigerator. And so, Karen said, I really would like a new refrigerator, a bigger refrigerator that we can actually put a gallon of milk in and not a cup. And so anyway, so I went and bought a normal human-sized refrigerator and I put it in the hole, and then came the problem. When you open the door, there's the windowsill and it didn't have room to open. And so I thought about it for a good 30 seconds and I had the solution. And so I went and got my Sawzall and I just hacked off one huge chunk of this window frame. And now the refrigerator door opened all the way up, and I even painted the part to match that I cut off. And Karen came home and she was a little bit confused as to why that was my solution, right? And here's the thing, I don't know what Karen's solution would have been to that problem, but it was probably more elegant than a Sawzall, right? And so anyway, but we're just different. And that was, honestly, I was trying my best. Like that wasn't even like just mailing it in. I really thought about that. You see, so anyway, I sold that house, but I didn't make much of a profit. I don't know what happened. You see, there are personal and personality-based differences between all individuals, and I don't want to minimize that. But there are also more fundamental differences than that. There are core differences between men and women. And I know that sometimes this stuff is broad brush, and we can say, well, women are like this, and one woman can say, I'm not like that, and that's probably true, right? Because as individuals, we can always go our own direction. But there are certain kind of hardwired differences between men and women. So we're different in how we perceive things. We can look at the same situation, and you guys have experienced this, and see two different things, right? And then once we perceive things, we're going to function differently because of it. So even if we recognize the same thing, our brain would call for two different responses. The values that we place on certain things are just different. There are things that a man would look at and go, that's just not important. And a woman would go, this is the most important thing that you've seen today. Right? And the things that we tend to be good at are just different. And areas that we tend to be weak in are different. And that's so much of our struggle is that we look at each other and we go, why can't you just be more like me? Why can't you see the world like me? Why can't you respond more like me? Because obviously I'm right. And so in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 28, it says this. This is an interesting verse. It says, those who marry will face many troubles in this life. All right? Now, I want to explain this because this is an interesting passage and it seems to go the other direction from what we're talking about. But when we explain it, it'll all make sense. So, those who marry will face many troubles. And in this chapter, the Apostle Paul is talking to the Corinthian church. And he's actually addressing some very specific problems that Corinthian Christians were facing, right? And so he's saying, listen, in this current circumstance that you guys are in, because life is exceedingly hard. See, it was really tough at this point in time to be a Jesus follower in Corinth. Persecution was starting, trouble was starting, there was all these things. It was getting hot to be a Christian. It was tough. There was opposition against the Christian church in Corinth. And so in another verse, he actually refers to their circumstances as in this present crisis, he says. You should respond like this, this, and this. So the church is in a separate crisis all on its own in this area, right? And so it's a challenging and dangerous time to represent Jesus in the city of Corinth. And so because of that, Paul advises them, if you're not already married, you should consider not marrying because of this present crisis. And it's not because marriage is bad. He's just saying, listen, you're going to face extra challenges by being married, right? And so that's on top of the challenges that you're already facing. And so he says, listen, if you can handle not being married, and some of you guys are like, listen, can I still sign up for that? I can handle not being married, but that's not what he means. So like he's saying, listen, if you can handle like if you know like physically, sexually, all that kind of stuff, like you can handle like a life of celibacy, great. But if not, go ahead and marry, because he's saying that marriage adds this extra layer of complexity to the challenges that they're facing, right? And so here's what I mean. Like if you go through a difficult and dangerous situation, if you're single, you're only having to navigate it for who? Yourself. So you only have to worry about, is this solution acceptable to me? Right? So the problem I had with the refrigerator was that I addressed it as a single person, right? I said, this solution works for me. That's all that matters. And so that's the thing. When you face a challenge, if you're single, you go, hey, the solution only has to work for me. I only have to consider my thoughts, my feelings, and my values, and the solution only has to please me. And then on top of that, you have to also be concerned not just about your solutions to problems, but he says you have to concern yourself with how to please your spouse. Like how to please your husband, how to please your wife. And there's a reason that he says you have to be concerned with how to please each other. And it's just really simple, and it's that we're different and we don't naturally understand each other. And so it takes extra thought. It takes extra concern. If Karen were just like me, I wouldn't have to think about how to keep her happy. I would just buy her a car with lots of horsepower and just, like give her steak every once in a while, and she would be completely content forever, right? But there's differences. I have to think about what she wants and what she needs. Pleasing a spouse, it takes thought. It takes effort, it takes deliberate understanding, and it takes doing things that don't come naturally, right? Men, it means talking about feelings, right? I know it's so exciting, right? I mean, it just takes doing things that don't come naturally. It's an extra level of effort. And so learning to please a spouse can be kind of like trying to write out driving directions to a place you've never been in a language you don't speak, okay? And that's kind of the closest equivalent I can make, because you're always just in the dark. How many of you guys have done this? Guys and girls both. It's like you're like, hey, let's see if this works. And you're watching the expression, you're like, I think that's a right turn. Here we go. Like, nope, that was a wrong turn. Back up, let's go this way, right? And you're just kind of feeling your way through, and you go, I think this works, right? And that's just what it is, because we're dealing with someone that's fundamentally different. Marriage, it adds this degree of complexity to life. And so the question is, what kind of complexity does it bring? That scripture that we read, it's kind of interesting. It says that those who marry will face troubles. That word trouble, it technically means pressure caused by pushing two things together. And so that's what's happening in a marriage, is that you've got the pressures of life, you've got the trouble of life pushing in, but it's not just pushing in on one, it's pushing in on two, and it's causing friction between them, right? And so you've got all these things you're walking through, all these things you're going through, and here's you, and and you're fundamentally different. There's all these pieces that are bumping up against each other and grinding, and it just creates friction, it creates heat, it creates trouble. And so the challenges of life create external pressures that push married people into each other, and it causes collisions. Sometimes they're just little, they're kind of gentle collisions, right? And sometimes they're more drastic than that. Like, give me some examples, Bob. So here's the thing. Financial hardship, it's one of those things that creates pressure in a marriage, in a relationship, right? And so it forces two people into each other, and they're forced to communicate. How many of you guys have ever been in a period of life where you had more than enough money and you didn't really have to talk about money much? It was just like, you do you, I do me, and then there's always enough at the end. And then something changes and there's not more than enough. And now we have to actually figure this thing out. Now we have to prioritize things together. Now we have to decide what's really important for both of us, because we've got a limited resource and it's got to please both of us. And so it forces us into uncomfortable conversations. It forces us to make tough decisions together and set common priorities. And here's the thing. If you navigate one of these processes well, it's very positive for your relationship. You'll actually grow much closer together as a result of the financial hardship, but there's also the potential for it to bring great harm, right? Is if you don't handle it well, if you don't communicate, if you don't do this thing right, financial pressure can actually cause a great deal of damage to relationships. Physical illness is another one, right? And so nobody wants to get sick, especially long-term big sickness, right? We love our independence. We love doing things for ourselves. We love not needing other people. But when there's physical illness touches a relationship, it pushes two people together. And now you have to do things for each other that you would have never done for each other before. You have to be vulnerable in ways that you never had to be vulnerable before, right? The things that you'll end up doing through this process will humble you in degrees that you've never been humbled before. So in the long run, that will actually deepen and grow your relationship in ways that you never could have done without that external pressure, right? But again, I've also seen physical illness ruin relationships and marriages because it wasn't handled well together. And so here's what he's talking about. There's these external pressures, and they force us into this dealing with each other, and it creates friction. It creates struggles. And so these kinds of pressure and the friction, it can do a couple of things. It can either make us mad, and it can make us run into each other violently, or it can slowly wear off those rough edges. And if that's what happens, then you actually grow together. You grow together as a couple, but you grow especially as a person. So here's the thing. If we don't understand that this is just part of it, that this is baked into the process, then we will resent these times and we'll run away from them. And that's what so many of us do, is that we get to these seasons where there's running into each other and there's friction, and we do anything we can to avoid those things. We do anything we can to stay out of those conversations. How many of you guys have ever come home, and it's all right, I don't know if women do this, but it's like you come home and you can tell there's something hanging in the air, and it's like, I need to find a project to do right now, because whatever is getting ready to be talked about, I don't want to talk about, right? I'm going to go out to the garage. I'm going to take the car apart. Something's broken. I need to go somewhere, right? I don't want to talk about whatever's getting ready to be discussed, and that's the wrong reaction. See, these periods of pressure push in, and it causes us sometimes to run for the hills and avoid the difficult things. And so here's the last point. When life's challenges push on a Christian marriage, that pressure is actually part of God's plan for the development of your soul. You see, it's deeper than just your relationship. Marriage is part of God's plan to make you into all that he wanted you to be. You see, there's this saying that's out there like, marriage isn't designed to make you happy. It's designed to make you holy. And I hope your marriage makes you happy as well. But ultimately, this partnership is part of God's plan to grow you as a person in his image. And so when it works to do that, that's great, okay? And so Scripture tells us that God created mankind in his image. And it says that in the image of God, he created them male and female. And that's an interesting way that it says it, and it says that for a reason. It means that he created women in his image, and he created men in his image, but yet they're different. And so that means that women are created in the image of God to reflect certain aspects of God's divine nature. And then men are also created in the image of God with a tendency for certain aspects of God's divine nature, but that they're different. Men and women are different by design. God actually designed us to reflect glory from different ends of the spectrum of his divine nature. And so here's the thing. Women were built to receive and reflect certain aspects of God's character. Men were built to receive and reflect certain aspects of God's character. It's almost like we have these divine antennas that are set to different frequencies. All right? And so if you're a woman that's tuned into God, you're going to be able to reflect a certain frequency of his character. And if you're a man, it's going to be different. And again, this stuff is broad brush. And so don't like take exception with particulars on it. But men tend to be physically stronger, right? And more apt to use force. That's just how we're kind of wired. And the thing is, in the right context, those things can be great reflections of God's strength and his power and his might, right? And men are designed that way on purpose. Women tend to be able to understand and express emotions in a way that's completely foreign to a man. I heard someone say once that I think women can process 27 distinct emotions. All right, and for men, just so you know, there's two. There are two emotions. There's good and there's bad. How do you feel? I feel good. How do you feel? I feel bad. Can you please elaborate? I just told you everything I know. It's just, again, some of us are more unique, but we're just simple in that way. We just are. It's good or it's bad. I don't know what else to tell you, all right? And that's how we're wired, but women are just dialed in different. They're designed to be able to understand and quantify all these nuances that men just aren't built for. We're just different by design, right? Women tend to want empathy. When a woman tells you a problem, I'm just going to help you, men. If your wife tells you a problem, the first and most important thing she wants is just empathy. She doesn't want you to solve it, which does not make any sense to us. That seems like a complete waste of time, waste of energy. Why did you tell me about it if you didn't want me to fix it, right? That's what I do. I fix things. I get the Sawzall. It won't be a problem anymore, right? We're just different. We are, and that's okay, because each side of this thing is part of the usefulness of God's divine character built in. We're built in to handle different parts of the equation, right? And so one of the greatest frustrations that women have with men is that they're men. It's just that. It's like we marry a man, and at first we're like, all those manly things are so attractive. We're like, ah! And then we're like, what is wrong with you? Are you stupid? Yes, he was when you met him, right? He told you this. You asked him questions, and his answer was good or bad, right? You knew this going in. But along the way, we just kind of forget that stuff. We're different, right? And so women get frustrated when men are just honestly just being, now sometimes they're being a bad example of a man. So like I said, it's not necessarily the problem. Sometimes it is the problem, right? But we get frustrated when men are men. Men are just emotionally less accessible than you would like. It's just true. They're just that way. They're gruffer and less delicate than you would like. I cannot tell you how many times Karen has told me, delicate. I'm a flower. I'm like, oh, okay, right? I got it this time. You don't have to tell me anymore, right? And then, like men are just more focused on material things and practical things than you would like. Like when they're coming in, they're not concerned with the moods and the feelings and how Timmy's doing and everything else. They're like concerned with the fact that this is broken or that's not working. And that's just how they're wired. They're less concerned with the cleanliness of the home than you would like. Like, when I come home, it's like, oh, it looks clean. Like, no, it's not clean. Oh, okay, I thought it was clean, right? And so nothing attacked me, so I thought it was fine. And so that's just the thing. And then for men, one of the greatest frustrations that men have with women is that they're women, right? We go crazy and they're just more emotional than we would like. It just happens that way. They're more complicated to deal with than we would like, right? And they're also, just too interested in wanting us to understand what's going on without being told what's going on. And that's something I learned early on, and I was like, I don't know. I wish you would please just tell me. I can't figure it out. Please just tell me, okay? And also there are just far too many occasions that seem to call for crying, and we just don't understand. I thought everything was fine. Everything is fine. Like, well, why are you crying? We just don't understand. There's no crying in baseball, but that's already been established. But there's so many other categories that shouldn't need crying, and so. If anybody can give me a ride home later, I'm probably going to. Okay. I'm open for lunch. And so, men, we get frustrated because women are not as accessible for physical connection as maybe sometimes we would like without first having a high level of emotional connection, which we could honestly probably do without most of the time. We're just different. And here's the thing, sometimes we act like what we want is someone who thinks and acts just like we do, but then looks like you look, right? And it's like, and we kind of trick ourselves and think, no, what I want is someone that looks like Karen, but thinks like me, right? I'd never be able to find my Sawzall though. And so anyway, but that's not what we want. We think we want that, but we don't, right? It would be easier, but it would be worse. Like it would be easier to eat a bologna sandwich than it is to eat a steak, but it's worse. You would rather eat the steak. It takes more effort to cook it, to prepare it, to do all those things, but I promise it's worth it once you do. There's 4 different places in Scripture where it says, it refers to marriage like this, that it's 2 people becoming one flesh. And there's this weird analogy where it's like 2 becoming one. And for a man and a woman to truly become one, it requires us to stretch and to grow, because as we've just established, we're different. And so it requires love and mutual concern to get out of the familiar and into the unfamiliar and recognize, what? I know I don't care that much about this thing that you care about, but because I have love and concern, I'm going to care about it because you care about it. That's what it requires. It requires humility to recognize this is how I am, but this isn't the right way, right? Isn't that what we do? Like, this is how I am, that makes it right. No, this is how you are, and so I recognize and I'm humble enough to play in your world for a minute too, right? And that's what we do. It requires humility. It requires valuing each other enough to learn from each other. To go, no, you don't need to adapt to me. Like, we need to adapt to each other. We need to learn. It requires, like I said, venturing into unknown territory and meeting the other in ways that are foreign to us, right? And so what we're going to do is we're all going to take a minute and we're going to ask every man to cry. No, I'm just kidding. But we meet the other in a way that's foreign to us. See, there are aspects of God's divine nature that are reflected in your spouse that your antenna is not set to receive from God himself. That means the only way you're going to have contact with that is through them. And so that emotional complexity that I talked about, like Karen is my source for that. God is going to put that in my life through her because he wants to grow me and develop me. He wants me to not just be simple for my whole life. and to learn the difference between bad and disappointed, right? Like, oh, those are two different emotions. We've already grown. See? It's possible, right? And so that's what happens, is that our spouse actually makes us better. We have contact with things from God through them that we wouldn't receive on our own. Their receivers are calibrated to a different end of the spectrum than ours are. And so in the moments when life together is stretching you, it's actually God himself delivering himself to you through them. He's exposing you to bits that you just wouldn't get without that gift in your life. And their unique reflection of God's nature is part of God's plan to make you into what he wants to make you into. You see, it's supposed to be a stretch to relate to your spouse. It's supposed to be a stretch to connect with your spouse. We should both be out on a limb always. We should both be doing things that we're uncomfortable with always, stretching ourselves always. And that stretching is part of God's plan to make more of your soul than it would have been alone, right? But you got to stretch together. I want to invite the band to come back because we're going to sing 2 songs before we finish today. I want to show you a picture as they're coming. This is a picture of diamonds and then carbon. So the top thing is a diamond, for those of you men that have never bought your wife a diamond. And so anyway, that's just a little tip for you. No, but that's a diamond, and then everything beneath it is carbon. Diamonds are among the rarest elements on earth. Not the rarest, but they're among the rarest, right? Carbon is among the most common elements on earth. And just so that you know, just a tidbit, carbon is also among the most common elements in you. And the only thing that there's more of in you than carbon is oxygen. And so you're mostly carbon yourself, right? And the only difference between that diamond and that carbon is the process that introduces heat and pressure. You see, that's where this pressing comes in. We talk about the trouble of life. And as that pressing happens, that heat and that pressure will transform the common carbon into these rare diamonds. You see, God buried unique reflections of his divine nature in your spouse. But there are differences. And these differences are going to cause friction. But inside of a loving, committed, and tender marriage, God will use those divine reflections from them to make more of you. In this diamond-making process, I want to be clear. Marriage is not the pressure cooker. Life is, okay? Marriage isn't the pressure cooker. Life is. Marriage isn't hard. Life is hard. See, life is the pressure cooker, but on your own, you're missing certain elements. And so you need what the spouse brings to the table. They add things in. So now when you have them added to the equation, the pressures that life brings, it actually has the potential to turn you into something so much more rare, so much more valuable, so much more precious. And you add those elements to their life, and they add those elements to your life. And so here's the thing. Addressing life's challenges together in a loving partnership with someone who is so fundamentally different, it grows your character in ways that nothing else can, and in ways that only God can engineer. That's why it's part of his plan. And so to walk through challenging and complex situations with someone that is so fundamentally different is part of God's design to grow you. So I encourage you to, in the next few days, to look at your spouse and recognize, man, they're not the problem. They're my partner against the problem. They're the one that God has given me to walk through this together, and they're going to make me better, right? I'm going to pray, and then we're going to stand and sing a couple songs. Father.